Hey, welcome. I'm glad you're here. My name is Davy Veldhoven, and in this free course, I'm going to show you how to build a professional IT infrastructure for a company from the ground up. And we're not just going to install a few things and hope for the best. We're going to build this properly, together. More importantly, you're going to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how to apply it the right way in a realistic environment. My goal here is not just to get you to a working lab setup. I want you to understand what's happening under the hood. As we build this out, I'll point out common mistakes, explain why certain decisions matter, and show you how to troubleshoot when things don't work the first time. Because trust me, in real life, things often do not work on the first try. And that's exactly why it matters that you know where to look, what to check, and how to use your knowledge to fix the problem. In this series, we're going to work with an evaluation copy of Windows Server 2022 Data Center Edition. That gives us access to some powerful enterprise features you won't find in the standard edition. That said, for a lot of smaller environments, standard edition is honestly more than enough. The biggest difference is mainly in the licensing model, but that's not something you need to worry about right now. To tie it all together, we're going to use OPNsense as our router and firewall. So we're not just building a Windows Server environment here. We're building a complete infrastructure with routing, security, network segmentation, identity, file storage, VPNs, IP version 4 and IP version 6. Pretty much everything you'd expect to see in a real environment. What are we actually going to build? We're going to start by setting up a stable and scalable lab environment in Hyper-V. That's going to be our foundation. And that matters, because we want to build something we can keep expanding later. Not a temporary mess, but a clean structure where we can add new servers and networks as we progress through the course. After that, we'll set up an OPNsense router and firewall. This router becomes the place where all the network traffic passes through from the internet into your local environment. This is where we decide what traffic is allowed, what is not, how networks communicate with each other, and how systems get internet access from behind the router. We will configure DHCP so clients automatically receive IP addresses. We'll make sure traffic is routed properly between networks, and we'll lay the groundwork for things like IP version 6 and later on VPN connections between sites. And we're also gonna manage servers the way it's actually done in practice. So instead of logging in locally everywhere, we'll use PowerShell, Server Manager and Remote Desktop. Now that's important because in a real environment you want to manage systems efficiently, and PowerShell is going to help us to do things faster and smarter. And then we'll build Active Directory with Active Directory domain services and DNS. And honestly, this is the point where your network starts becoming an actual environment instead of just a bunch of separate machines. With Active Directory, users can sign in centrally, computers become part of a single domain, and we can manage permissions and policies from one place. DNS plays a huge role in that. Not just for translating names to IP addresses, but because Active Directory depends on DNS to locate domain controllers and services. If your DNS is not set up correctly, you'll see that immediately in things like login issues, group policy failures, or systems simply not being able to find each other. So this is one of the most important parts of the entire setup, and it's something we want to get right from the start. And we're also gonna take a look at Active Directory sites and services. We'll start with just one location, so at first it might not seem all that exciting. But the moment you introduce multiple sites, this becomes very important. With sites and services, you're basically telling Active Directory how your network is physically laid out. Which subnets belongs to which location, and which domain controllers belong there too. Based on that, Active Directory decides things like which domain controller a client should talk to and how replication between servers should work. If this isn't configured properly, traffic can end up crossing slow links for no good reason, and replication can become inefficient. So even though it runs mostly in the background, it has a big impact on performance and stability. And after that, we'll move into Active Directory certificate services. That's where we build our own certificate environment, which we usually call a PKI or public key infrastructure. Now, that might sound like something you only worry about much later, but in reality, certificates start showing up everywhere the moment you want to secure an environment properly. Think about secure LDAP connections, internal web services, radius authentication, encrypted communication between systems, and eventually being able to establish trust for devices and services inside your own network. With Active Directory certificate services, we're basically setting up our own internal certificate authority. And that matters, because it means we don't have to rely on random self-signed certificates or external providers for every internal service that needs to communicate securely. So this becomes a core building block for trust, authentication, and encryption inside your own infrastructure. And then we'll use those certificates to secure internal communication. Up to that point, we'll mainly be focused on making sure everything works. But after that, we shift into the next stage. It works, and it's also set up cleanly and securely. For example, we'll look at securing LDAP traffic, so directory traffic is no longer moving across the network unencrypted. And we will use certificates for internal services that need to trust each other. That matters because in a professional environment, you don't just want functionality, you also want control over how systems authenticate and how traffic is secured. And of course, we're gonna build file servers and storage services too, because in the end, it all comes back to data for our users, am I right? Users need to be able to store, share, and access files. And we want to do that centrally, securely, and in a way that actually makes sense. We're gonna work with DFS, storage spaces direct, and deduplication. And we're gonna set up users and groups properly. This may sound basic, but it's where things often go wrong. Environments start out clean, then get messy as users, departments, and permissions grow. Rights get assigned directly to users, groups lose structure, and before long, nobody knows who should have access to what. So from day one, we're going to set this up properly with clean structure, naming, roles, and group memberships, so management stays clean and permissions stay scalable. And we're gonna set up a radius solution using MPS. That gives us central authentication for services that need to verify access first, like a captive portal for example, or other network services tied to Active Directory. Instead of managing authentication separately on each device, we handle it centrally through MPS using Active Directory, group memberships, and policy. That keeps the environment cleaner and much easier to scale. After that, we're going to expand everything to a second site. Because up to this point, we've been working from one central site. But in the real world, companies grow, and that means multiple locations. So here we make a move to a multi-site setup with a second router and a site-to-site IPsec VPN connecting both locations. That way, each site keeps its own local network, while still working together as one single environment. Now, at this second site, we will add an extra domain controller which is read-only. That extra read-only domain controller matters because users at that site won't have to depend on the connection to headquarters for every sign-in or domain-related action. That makes the environment faster, but also more reliable, because if the link between the two sites drops for a while, users can still log in locally and keep working. And on top of that, we are gonna use branch cache. That allows frequently used files or data to be cached locally, so they don't have to be pulled over the internet again and again. And that becomes especially useful at our second location, because it reduces network traffic and noticeably improves the user experience. So yes, I guess this ends up being a pretty complete solution. Now, what do you need if you want to follow along with me? You'll need a system with at least 4 CPU cores and support for virtualization. Most of the time that's already enabled on modern systems. But if you run into problems, check your computer's BIOS and make sure virtualization is turned on. I also recommend at least 32 GB of RAM, although with some optimization you can get through this course with at least 16 GB of RAM. And you'll want around 500 GB of storage, preferably on an SSD, with roughly 200 GB free. An SSD is strongly recommended for performance. If you're still using hard drives, it's ideal if you have 2 of them, so you can spread the load a bit. But don't stress if your system is a little slower. With some patience, you can still follow this course just fine. Now, in this series, we'll be working for a fictional company called Dove Bridge Technologies. And what exactly they do, I have no idea. Maybe they build American spy pigeons. I guess you never know. But what I do know is this. They urgently need solid IT infrastructure to accomplish their business goals. And we're going to provide that for them, you and me, together. This was the introductional video. I will see you in the second part.